This 24-chapter series will trace the rise of the Habiru revolt, drawing a direct parallel to the biblical Hebrew uprising described in the book of Samuel. From its earliest stages under King Saul to the conquest of Jerusalem by King David, this conflict culminates in the Aramean campaign and the formation of the Kingdom of Israel. Through an in-depth analysis, we will not only illuminate the Habiru rebellion, but also present compelling evidence that reinforces the biblical narrative and attests to its key events. At the heart of this investigation lies a bold proposition: the identification of King David with Tagi of Gintikirmil, a military leader who authored 3 Amarna Letters and is referenced as a pivotal figure in several others. Tagi's presence in these texts places him at the center of the political and military upheavals of the Late Bronze Age. Along the way, we will uncover striking connections between David's mighty warriors, his allied kings, and also the enemies of Israel during this time, with historically attested figures from the Amarna texts, offering fresh insights into this transformative period. With this ambitious study, we seek to establish David as the most historically attested figure in the entire Old and New Testaments. Join us on this fascinating journey from its very beginning, from the rise of Saul, the first king of Israel, and the man who was the catalyst of the Hebrew revolt, as described in the Amarna Letters. The Amarna archive is composed of 382 catalogued letters written in clay by Egyptian vassals and found directly from Pharaoh Akhenaten's royal repository in Egypt, where they remain buried for 3 millennia. Of this total, there are 64 of them about a certain revolt happening in the lands of Canaan. The revolt is caused by a group named the Habiru. In the context of the Amarna Letters, the Habiru is the Egyptian term to designate individuals of a lower social class. It is a pejorative term for rebels and marauders. It is a social class distinction, not an ethnic one. But this study suggests that the Habiru propagandists took the term and made it their own. A loose connection with an ancestor of the land named Aber was created, and the ethnic unifier term Hebrew became the group standard. By concluding the class distinction Habiru and the ethnic term Hebrew are designating the same group of people in the context of the Amarna Letters, we can find synchronisms among these letters and the biblical account. Many Amarna Letters, like the number 271, illustrate how the Habiru attacks in the land caused so many worries to the Egyptian vassals. They describe,
"May the king, my lord, know that the war against me is severe. So may the king, my lord, save his land from the power of the Habiru."
We know from the biblical account that the person who rose as leader of the Hebrew people was a man named Saul. This is described in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 10, verses 17 to 23, during a public event happening in the city of Mizpah, where the prophet Samuel announced,
"Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." Then the people shouted, "Long live the king!"
But the name Saul was probably not the real name of the Hebrew leader people asked for, since the word Saul just means the one who was asked for. It is more likely that Saul was not his birth name, but a title or epithet he took for himself based on the people's desire. We also know from the Bible that Saul was only taken seriously as a king after his victory against an enemy of Israel, Nahash of Ammon, who conquered and tortured the city of Jabesh-Gilead. The events of the victory of Saul against Nahash are described in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 11 verses 8 to 12, as it reads,
"Saul broke into the camp of the Ammonites and slaughtered them until the heat of the day."
We have a possible synchronism to the event in the Amarna letter number 252. This is the letter of the leader of the illegal group called Habiru, a man named Labaya. The letter has Labaya himself explaining to Pharaoh the reasons for having attacked another city ruler who was also a vassal of Egypt. He writes,
"When I had sworn my peace, and when I swore the other magnates swore with me, my city, along with my God, was seized. He has slandered me, and I am slandered before the king, my lord."
This study proposes that the name of the Habiru leader, Labaya, was the personal name used by King Saul of the Hebrews in his daily interactions. The Amarna Letter 252, written by this Habiru leader, could be the Hebrew king explaining the attack against Nahash. The Habiru leader's explanation to the Pharaoh was clear and dramatic by saying that, like Saul in the biblical account, he was returning an aggression. The letter reads,
"Moreover, when ants are struck, do they not fight back and bite the hand of the man who struck them? How at this time can I show deference, and then another city of mine will be seized?"
The name Labaya also has a direct correlation to the biblical account. It derives from the Semitic roots labi, that means lion, and yah, a very common theophoric component during the Amarna period that this study will defend. It refers to Yahweh, yielding the name Lion of Yahweh. Such a translation not only challenges the prevailing historical consensus, suggesting that the monumental biblical events, centered on God's revelation of his name and culminating at Mount Sinai, took place only a full century after the Amarna Letters, but also provides the origins of the symbol of the Israelite monarchy to the much earlier Egyptian historical evidence, while also aligning this leader to the description of Saul in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 23, that reads,
"Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions."
More resolute in this idea, by utilizing the Amarna Letters as direct records of King David's reign, it is possible to interpret these records as accurate historical accounts rather than merely distant memories, thus providing a more faithful representation of the events in his life. The next chapter will delve into Saul's remarkable transformation from a rising Hebrew leader to a declared enemy of Egypt. It will explore how he secured his kingship amidst internal turmoil and external challenges, setting the stage for the Habiru conflict that redefined the Levant's political landscape. Furthermore, it will examine the peculiar event known as Saul's harsh oath, where he condemned his own son to death, and its intriguing parallel in the Amarna Letters, which recount a similar incident involving the son of Labaya, who was likewise condemned to die by his own father. In the biblical account, Saul was anointed as the first king of the Hebrews through the prophet Samuel to unite the 12 tribes and deliver Israel from external threats, such as Nahash of Ammon, who sought to oppress the people of Jabesh-Gilead. He then immediately initiated a war against the Philistines to defend Israel's sovereignty. The book of 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 4 describes,
"Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become obnoxious to the Philistines, and the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal."
There are parallels in the Amarna Letters, where the rulers, not only from Philistine cities like Gath and Ashkelon, but also from the cities of Jerusalem, Shechem, Megiddo, and other regions, complain about the actions of a certain Habiru revolt happening in their jurisdictions. Amarna Letter 244, authored by the Egyptian vassal Zeruiah of Megiddo, provides a significant connection to the rise of Saul as the leader of the Hebrews. This letter marks the first explicit accusation against Labaya, identified in this study as King Saul, portraying him as the leader of the Habiru rebels. The letter states,
May the king, O Pharaoh, give a garrison of 100 men to guard his city, or else Labaya may seize it. Known that Labaya has no other intent, he simply seeks the seizure of Megiddo.
In the biblical account, such a large-scale war starts with the son of Saul, Jonathan, attacking the Philistines without his father's consent. As described in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 1, that reads,
One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father.
This event led to the first battle between Hebrew forces and the Philistine army, known as the Battle of Michmash. It is important to highlight that, according to the Bible, before this battle, Saul issued a strict command, ordering his men to refrain from eating until the day's conflict was over. Despite the decree, his son, Jonathan, inadvertently broke the command by eating honey shortly after the battle concluded. Supposedly, the act of defiance from his son caused God to curse the entire army. And Saul harshly condemns his own son to death in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 44 to 46. The text reports,
So Jonathan asked him, "I tasted a little honey with the end of my staff, and now I must die?" Saul responded, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you do not die, Jonathan."
It seems harsh for a father to be willing to execute his own son for such a flimsy command. But a similar situation does happen in the Amarna Letter number 254, which describes Labaya handing over one of his sons to the authorities, namely, to the commissioner known as Adaiah, to be executed. During this time, the Habiru leader was still presenting himself as a loyal Egyptian vassal, so the command against his son was a deflection of the blame for the attack to avoid Egyptian retaliation. This letter, in Labaya's own words, underscores the immense difficulty of this decision by comparing it to the gravity of taking his own life.
I did not know that my son was consorting with the Habiru. I herewith hand him over to Adaiah. Moreover, O Pharaoh, know that, if the king wrote to me, "Put a bronze dagger into your heart and die," how could I not do it?
The situation is just too similar, since Jonathan also attacked the Philistine outpost like the son of Labaya attacked another vassal of Egypt, without his father's consent. It can be argued from a more poetic perspective that eating the honey before the proper time is a metaphor about acting hastily in the desire to anticipate a reward. In this case, Jonathan attacked the Philistines before the appropriate time, just like the son of Labaya also did. Both, the son of the Habiru leader and the son of the Hebrew leader, were being condemned not for a flimsy command, but for acting impulsively and bringing a military response against his father before he was ready for battle, and the war indeed escalated. In the end, according to the biblical account, the soldiers, who had witnessed Jonathan's bravery and leadership in the victory over the Philistines, refused to let him be executed over a mere nominal oath. Finally, Saul disavowed his oath, sparing his son and intensifying his attack on the Philistines. This moment highlights how the will of the people and personal bonds of leadership could override even solemn vows made under a high authority. Similarly, Labaya gradually embraced his rebellious nature, expanding his influence by capitalizing on local dissatisfaction with Egyptian rule. Though nominally loyal to Pharaoh, he defied direct commands, ignored Egyptian commissioners, and seized control over neighboring city-states. His rise to power was fueled by his ability to rally discontented local rulers and mercenaries, including the group known as the Habiru, forming a coalition of insurgents. What began as minor uprisings and territorial encroachments escalated into full-scale rebellion as Labaya seized strategic cities and challenged loyalist rulers. As Saul kept consolidating his kingship in accordance to the parallels with the victories of Habiru leader Labaya, the next chapter will explore the emergence of the biblical figure of David in the Amarna Letters, from his identification to a certain military leader known as Tagi of Gintikirmil, shedding light on his role as a pivotal figure in the late Bronze Age Levant. This study examines the rise of King Saul, as described in the biblical narrative, and the uprising of Labaya, as attested in the Amarna Letters, to be recording the same military campaigns, suggesting Labaya was his theophoric name and Saul a title this Habiru leader took for himself. Unfortunately, in the Amarna Letters, after several exchanges of correspondence, the defiant actions of the Habiru eventually reached a point of no return, and communication between Labaya and Pharaoh abruptly ceased. Although Labaya's direct communication with Pharaoh ended, other Egyptian vassals recount ongoing attacks by the rebellious Habiru. These conflicts bear striking similarities to Saul's campaigns, as mentioned in the biblical account in 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 47, that reads,
After Saul had assumed rule over Israel, he fought against their enemies on every side: Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines.
For example, Amarna Letter 197 highlights the ruler of Damascus informing the pharaoh of two other local rulers who provided chariots to the Habiru. The letter records,
Two traitors have moved a rebellion against me. Having barred the city gate on me, they took chariots from Ashtaroth, but gave them both to the Habiru, and both did not give them to the king, my lord.
Similarly, Amarna Letter number 64 details how another ruler was caught up in fierce fighting in southern Canaan.
May the king, my lord, be informed that the war against me is severe. It may seem good to the king, my lord, to send a magnate to protect me.
Other letters, such as Amarna Letter number 248, document Habiru victories within the Lower Galilee region.
Let the king, my lord, be informed that all the possessions that the king gave to his servant have been expropriated. The men of the city of Tanakh slaughtered my cattle and drove me away.
The growing power of the Habiru is also highlighted in Amarna Letter 299, where Yapahu, the ruler of Gezer, appeals for help.
Since the Habiru are stronger than we, may the king give me his help, and may the king, my lord, save me from the Habiru, or else the Habiru may destroy us.
The city of Gezer would later fall into the hands of a certain ruler named Adadanu, as he authored 3 Amarna letters, from numbers 292 to 294. In the biblical account, this city is the frontier for the lowlands of Shephelah, where the battle at the Valley of Elah took place. This was the scene for David's legendary debut as a warrior against Goliath, when a major victory against the Philistine army is described. The text from the book of 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 51 to 52 reads,
When the Philistines saw that their hero Goliath was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and Ekron.
The parallels between the biblical battle of Elah and the letters of Adadanu illustrate the striking similarity in the dynamics of these ancient conflicts. First, the city of Gezer was not only situated near the northern border of Philistine territory, but also formed part of a larger network of valleys within the lowlands of Shephelah. This area, characterized by its fertile plains and strategic passageways, served as a natural corridor for trade and military movement. Gezer's position placed it at a critical intersection between the highlands of Israelite settlement and the coastal plains dominated by the Philistines. The Valley of Elah became renowned for its biblical confrontation between David and Goliath, further emphasizing Gezer's role as a frontier city. Second, the name Adadanu derives from the Akkadian roots Ada, meaning father, and Danu, meaning justice, yielding the interpretation, my father is just. This Akkadian name can be seen as a linguistic counterpart to the Hebrew name Abinadab, one of Saul's sons. The name Abinadab means my father is noble, built from the Hebrew root Abi, meaning father, and Nadab, meaning noble. Thus, this correspondence provides a plausible basis for identifying Adadanu as the same person as Abinadab. Third, and perhaps the most striking argument, comes from the report by this ruler, identified with the son of Saul. He describes a confrontation against a certain enemy named Peah, the son of Golatu, who is said to have been a trusted servant of the Pharaoh. The name of the father, Golatu, bears a striking resemblance to the biblical figure Goliath, suggesting a possible connection between these accounts. The Amarna letter 294 reads,
Consider the deed of Peah, the son of Golatu, against me. My men whom I sent to serve in Jaffa and to guard the house of the king, my lord Peah, the son of Golatu, has just taken. May the king, my lord, be informed of these affairs of his servant.
This conflict, potentially involving a son of Saul and a son of Goliath, bears a remarkable resemblance to the biblical account of David's first major military encounter. Just as David's clash with Goliath marks the start of his rise as a key figure in Israelite history, this study aims to explore a richer understanding of David's early career from the potential identification with a certain figure in the Amarna letters known as Tagi of Gintikirmil. During the Battle of Elah, David was a low-ranking leader under Saul, which explains his absence in these initial Amarna letters. However, it will be his first act as an independent leader by rescuing the city of Keilah while pursued by Saul that this study will explore in the next chapter. The most famous account of King David happens in the Valley of Elah, between the Judean hills and Philistine country, where he famously defeated Goliath. This event finds a striking correlation with Amarna letters number 294, from Gezer, which names a certain Peah, the son of Golatu. The name and location parallels the famous Goliath and suggests a connection to the biblical narrative. Building on this connection, this study further investigates the possibility of David's early career being linked to a figure in the Amarna letters, known as Tagi of Gintikirmil, offering a richer historical context for the events described in the book of Samuel. The time frame for this event corresponds to the period after David's rise to prominence and renown, becoming one of King Saul's most celebrated military generals. His achievements earned him the honor of marrying the king's daughter, Michal. However, not long after, David fell out of favor with Saul, who grew increasingly jealous of his victories and growing popularity. This is a major theme of David's story as described in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 7 to 8, as it reads.
Once more war broke out, and David went out and fought the Philistines. He struck them with such force that they fled before him. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand.
According to the biblical account, Saul's jealousy led to David's persecution. The passage in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 9 to 10, builds from the previous one as it reads.
While David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape.
In this context, David's first independent act as a leader left potential archaeological evidence in the Amarna archive. The biblical narrative in 1 Samuel chapter 23, verses 5 to 6, describes David's rescue of the city of Keilah during this period of persecution.
Once again, David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him, Go down to Keilah, for I am going to give the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keilah, fought the Philistines, and carried off their livestock.
King David's victory at Keilah may be described in several Amarna letters, particularly letter number 287. This letter, written by Abdi-Heba, the ruler of Jerusalem, details the advances of two other rulers against cities under his authority. One of these rulers is Tagi of Gintikirmil, who is the main focus of this study, while the other, no less important, is named Eli-Melku. Abdi-Heba's letter states,
Consider the entire affair. Eli-Melku and Tagi brought troops into the town of Keilah against me. Consider the actions they did against your servant. Arrows they brought into Keilah.
I argue that the names Eli-Melku and Tagi correspond respectively to the biblical figures Ahimelech and David from the biblical account. The name Tagi originates in the Hurrian language. It could be either a shortened form of Tagi Haya, meaning beautiful, or on a stronger linguistic connection it could emerge from the root Tadi, meaning beloved. The use of this root can be exemplified in the name of the Hittite princess and later Egyptian queen, Tadu-Heba, which translates to beloved of Heba. Notably, the Hebrew name David also means beloved, directly aligning with the Hurrian root Tadi. This study, therefore, concludes that the names David and Tagi are both phonetically and etymologically compatible. Additionally, in Amarna letter number 287, Abdi-Heba, the ruler of Jerusalem, continues to report to Pharaoh about the actions of these two regional leaders. He mentions Eli-Melku, the ruler of Gezer, whose role this study will keep exploring in relation to the biblical character Ahimelech. However, instead of naming his ally Tagi directly, the ruler of Jerusalem refers to him as the son of Labaya. This designation resonates with the biblical narrative of King David's early career under King Saul. The letter underscores their actions in misappropriating lands under Jerusalem's jurisdiction to grant them to the Habiru, highlighting the territorial disputes of the period as it continues.
Consider the deed. This is the deed of Eli-Melku and the deed of the sons of Labaya, who have given the land of the king to the Habiru.
Through the identification of Amarna vassal, Labaya, with biblical King Saul, this connection is particularly compelling, as David did indeed become King Saul's son-in-law through his marriage to Michal. Moreover, a more compelling argument comes from the broader cultural practice during the Amarna letter of attributing honorific familial titles to individuals outside one's immediate family. The rulers of the five major powers, namely Babylon, Hatti, Mitanni, Elashia, and Egypt, addressed each other as brothers, reflecting mutual recognition of equal status and legitimacy. Conversely, vassal rulers referred to their sovereigns as father, signifying a hierarchical relationship where the father provided protection and a network of allied rulers, and the son offered loyalty, obedience, and military support when needed. The relationship between David and Ahimelech, the priest of Nob, is pivotal in David's journey. During his flight from King Saul, David sought refuge in Nob, where Ahimelech provided him with consecrated bread and the sword of Goliath. This assistance sustained David during a critical period. However, Ahimelech's support for David led to tragic consequences. King Saul, upon learning of this aid, ordered the massacre of Ahimelech and the other priests of Nob. In the following chapter, this study will explore the identification of Eli-Melku, a prominent vassal ruler of Gezer mentioned in the Amarna letters, with the biblical Ahimelech. This connection suggests a figure who embodies both military duty and priestly attributes similar to his predecessor Samuel, as well as other figures such as the sons of Eli, Deborah, Joshua, and Melchizedek. By examining these primary sources, the next chapter will also investigate the intriguing possibility that the Amarna letters preserve the historicity of the massacre of the priests at Nob, one of the most dramatic episodes in the Bible. Ahimelech, the priest of Nob, played a crucial role in David's survival during his flight from King Saul. He provided both sustenance and spiritual support. When David arrived in desperate need, Ahimelech offered him the consecrated bread from the tabernacle, ensuring he had the strength to continue his journey. The book of 1 Samuel chapter 21 verse 6 records,
"The priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away."
Beyond physical sustenance, Ahimelech handed David the sword of Goliath, a weapon of immense symbolic and practical value that reaffirmed David's identity as the champion of Israel.
The priest replied, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one." David said, "There is none like it. Let me have it."
These acts of assistance highlighted Ahimelech's willingness to prioritize compassion and divine purpose over strict adherence to ritual law. His intervention not only sustained David in the short term, but also reinforced his role as a divinely chosen leader, destined to challenge Saul's rule. This study proposes a possible identification of the biblical figure Ahimelech with Elimelech, a regional ruler who authored 5 letters addressed to the Pharaoh and is referenced in several others. The Pharaoh's high regard and trust in Elimelech are vividly demonstrated in Amarna letter number 369, where Elimelech is given the task of choosing female cupbearers, which is a position not only connected to religious practices, but also requiring utmost trust due to the risk of poisoning. The text of this letter reads,
Elimelech, the Pharaoh herewith sends to you Hani, the stable overseer of the archers, along with everything for the acquisition of beautiful female cupbearers, silver, gold, linen garments, carnelian, all sorts of precious stones, an ebony chair, all alike, fine things.
Indeed, the names Elimelech and Ahimelech are phonetically similar, but there are etymological differences since the name of biblical Ahimelech means brother of the king, while its Amarna's counterpart is translated as God is my king. But there can be several explanations for why keeping both names very similar phonetically but different etymologically. The history of Judaism is filled with examples of such changes and puns on words. And sure, having a change from God is my king, which could have a theologically problematic interpretation for the Judaic mindset during a period of pagan-ingrained culture when retelling the story of King David to brother of the king as to emphasize his alliance with David can be easily defended. Besides, any lingering doubts about the identification of Elimelech to Ahimelech will be decisively resolved by a far more compelling argument. The documentation of a catastrophic event that impacted this king, an event recorded with striking consistency in both the biblical narrative and the Amarna Letters. The biblical account in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 22, verses 16-20, writes about a massacre that was perpetrated by King Saul against this Ahimelech character. The book explains the massacre was a response of the jealous king because Ahimelech had helped David by sheltering him. This is why Saul boasts against him.
You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family.
The threat seems to have reached its fulfillment a few verses later, when it is described that under the orders of Saul, his men slaughtered the place.
Saul put to the sword Nob, the town of the priests, with its men and women, its children and infants, and its cattle, donkeys, and sheep. But one son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to join David.
This event happens almost identically in the Amarna Letters numbers 273 and 274, written by a Amarna vassal ruler named Lady of the Lions. She reports,
The mayors that were in the major cities of my lord are gone, and the entire land of the king took the side of the Habiru. May the king, my lord, inquire of his commissioner about what is being done in the land of the king. The two sons of Elimelech barely escaped being killed.
It is mesmerizing how the Amarna letter account has such a close synchronism with the biblical account. Sure, one can argue that in the biblical account only one son, Abiathar, survives the massacre, while in the Amarna letter, two unnamed sons were the survivors. The difference can be explained by the common ancient literary practice, known as spotlighting, to focus on the character of Abiathar, who keeps appearing in the narrative later. Most scholars of theology and religious studies consider Ahimelech to have died in the massacre perpetrated by Saul against the city of Nob because the ally of David disappears from the biblical account. Contrary to this belief, in Amarna archive, there are several descriptions of Elimelech as far as having outlived Labaya. In reality, the survival of Ahimelech after this event perpetrated by Saul is quite easy to explain, since the biblical text never explicitly says he died. He is just not mentioned again because the biblical text focuses his attention on his son Abiathar, and may also deliberately not mention him to prevent this Habiru ruler from competing with David as the protagonist of the story. The biblical depiction of Ahimelech underscores the pivotal roles in shaping David's early journey, marked by acts of provision, loyalty, and alignment with divine purpose. These actions paved the way for David's subsequent exile under the protection of the Philistines during Saul's relentless pursuit. This period, marked by both survival and diplomacy, saw David forming an unexpected alliance with the king of Gath and marrying Abigail, the widow of Nabal. Intriguingly, according to an Amarna letter, David may have even arranged a marriage between one of Abigail's daughters and Ahimelech to solidify his political alliances. In the next chapter, we will delve deeply into this phase of David's life, examining how his sojourn in Philistine territory supports the intriguing hypothesis that he may have authored 3 Amarna letters to the Pharaoh. This investigation will compare the identity of the ruler of Gath as depicted in the Amarna letters with the king of Gath described in the biblical account. Additionally, by recognizing that the king of Gath and the Pharaoh represent different tiers within the same hierarchical structure, we will explore the theme of deceit, drawing parallels between David's conduct toward the king of Gath and that of Tagi of Gintikirmiel, who similarly exploited the Pharaoh by offering excuses rather than fulfilling his tribute obligations. During the persecution by King Saul, David reached an agreement with the Philistine king, Achish of Gath. He allowed David and his men to find refuge in Philistine territory and granted David the town of Ziklag to be his base of operations, in exchange for his military service. The Bible records that during this period under Philistine submission, David had the support of the son of Ahimelech, named Abiathar, who provided David with divine counsel through the ephod, ensuring his decisions aligned with God's will. More decisive, he married Abigail, the widow of Nabal, who played a pivotal role in managing diplomacy and sustaining morale, solidifying her importance as a trusted advisor and support in his rise to power. Interestingly, the Amarna letters may illuminate the significance of both Abiathar and Abigail, not through their own actions, but through their connection to the biblical character Ahimelech, whom this study identifies as the Amarna vassal ruler known as Elimelech, during this period when David was living among the Philistines. This interpretation raises a controversial issue. While the biblical character is traditionally believed to have perished in the massacre at Nob, given the absence of further mentions in the biblical narrative, the Amarna letters portray Elimelech as gaining prominence after the corresponding massacre from the Amarna letters number 273 and 274 report. The Amarna archive showcased several letters referencing the character Elimelech, not only alive but also married to an unnamed daughter of the ruler Tagi, who this study identifies as King David. It is the Amarna letter number 249, authored by a ruler of Gath-Padala, that states,
My men are in the service of Elimelchu. What did I do to Elimelchu to make him command my men as if they were his servants? To Tagi, his father-in-law, he gave his own men.
The survival of Ahimelech after this event is quite easy to explain since the biblical text never explicitly says he died. On the other hand, such a marriage of Elimelchu to a daughter of Tagi needs further elaboration by converging Elimelchu's influence on David through both Abiathar and Abigail. Since we know Saul died when David was 30 years old, as described in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 4, there was not enough time for David to have a daughter in marrying age while Saul was still alive. This apparent difference can be answered by the theologians' consensus that David's wife Abigail had children from the previous marriage to her late husband Nabal that David took as his own. This is not a new idea, since this has been the standard explanation for the fact that Abigail's son Kileab was older than the sons of David with other wives, but this Kileab was never a contender to the throne. It is not a stretch from this perspective to think Ahimelech was married to a daughter of Abigail that David also took as his own. This gives more political weight to the marriage than the Bible makes apparent and explains why so much of the biblical narrative is spent on her. The biblical narrative continues to describe Saul's persecution leading to enemy lands, where David lived under the Philistines' submission. The book of 1 Samuel chapter 27, verse 7 is more specific in describing,
David lived in Philistine territory a year and 4 months.
It is clear in the biblical text that he submitted to the Philistine rule, since he had to give accounts of his actions to the king of Gath.
When Achish asked, "Where did you go raiding today?" David would say, "Against the Negev of Judah, or against the Negev of Jerahmeel, or against the Negev of the Kenites."
Biblical text asserts that the protagonist acted deceptively by launching attacks against the Philistine territories of Jeshur, Gerza, and Amalek. However, he ensured no survivors were left in these raids to prevent anyone from revealing that he remained loyal to the Hebrews. In fact, letters from the historical Tagi, identified in this study as King David, are preserved in the Amarna Letters. These letters suggest a connection between biblical Ziklag and the Amarna region of Gintik-Yermeel. This Tagi appears to have displayed a similar attitude toward the Amarna Pharaoh as the biblical David did toward the Philistine rulers, which this study suggests were merely different levels within the same chain of hierarchy. The element of deception can be interpreted when reading between the lines of Amarna letter 264.
As I am the servant of the king, I tried to assemble a caravan with my brother in charge, but he barely escaped being killed. He is unable to send my caravan to the king, my lord.
This Tagi was clearly supposed to send tributes to the king of Egypt, but instead he only gave excuses on why those tributes were not being sent. Another letter even has the opposite situation. The Amarna letter number 265 has Tagi receiving gifts from the Pharaoh, not only any gifts but really expensive ones.
The king, my lord, sent a present to me in the care of Tamasi, and Tamasi gave a gold goblet and 12 sets of linen garments.
In Amarna letter number 266, he finally sends gifts to the king of Egypt, but those are minor ones.
A harness for a pair of horses, and a bow and a quiver, a spear and covers.
He was taking advantage of his relationship with the Pharaoh. One may even find it odd that such a famous character of the Bible would write the formula of submission to the Pharaoh, but this Tagi goes even further on his words of flattery. It is likely that the excessive submission formula, by using poetic language, was an attempt to compensate Pharaoh for the terrible tributes he sent.
I looked this way and I looked that way, and there was no light. Then I looked towards the king, my lord, and there was light. I am indeed determined to serve the king, my lord.
It does sound like someone trying to hide something from Pharaoh, and we know from biblical texts that he was killing the men of the Pharaoh while giving those poetic lines of flattery. Besides, no theologian would argue against the poetry, the humility, and the deceit towards the Philistines found in the Amarna Letters as major characterizations of King David in the Bible. The next chapter will explore Mount Gilboa, the place that became the stage for a turning point in Israel's history, where David, the anointed successor, was drawn into the final confrontation against King Saul, the man who once ruled both his kingdom and his destiny. The outcome of this battle, steeped in drama and loss, may hold parallels in the lines of Amarna Letter 366, offering a tantalizing lens to reconsider its historical significance. According to the Bible, David's time of 1 year and 4 months under Philistine rule, particularly in Ziklag, showcased his ability to navigate complex political landscapes, forging unlikely alliances. Though nominally a vassal of King Achish of Gath, David maintained his independence, conducting strategic raids while carefully preserving Philistine trust. By cultivating relationships both among his hosts and neighboring tribes, David solidified a network of allies, laying the groundwork for his eventual ascent as a unifying leader in Israel. While David was still living in Philistine country, the Philistines prepared to battle King Saul. The leader of this Philistine coalition was Achish, king of Gath, the man to whom David had to report his activities. Again, the letters authored by the king of Gath are preserved in the Amarna archive, where he describes the preparations to his most decisive battle against the Habiru revolt. The leader of the pro-Egyptian coalition in the Amarna Letters is named Suardata. At first glance, this is a very different name from the biblical king of Gath, Achish. Indeed, there is no phonetic resemblance between the biblical name Achish and the name Suardata found in the archaeological record. However, etymologically, they are very similar. Both Achish and Suardata can be translated as "the sun has given." The biblical name derives from a shortened version of Achi-Shamash, which omits the theophoric element from the Canaanite sun god Shamash. In contrast, the Amarna name originates from the Hittite sun god Suwat, of Luwian and Hurrian origins. The Amarna letter number 283 underscore one of the most detailed description of the political landscape in this war between the Habiru rebel forces and the pro-Egyptian coalition. It is the king of Gath himself who describes to the Pharaoh the difficulties of this war against Labaya in a tone of necessity.
May the king, my lord, be informed that 30 cities have waged war against me. I am alone. The war against me is terrible.
On the biblical account, the gathering of Philistine forces for the final battle against King Saul of the Hebrews is described in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 1, that reads,
In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces to fight the Hebrews. Achish said to David, You must understand that you and your men will accompany me in the army.
But the Bible explicitly tells us that even though David was living as a Philistine during this time, he did not take part in the battle because the other Philistine leaders did not trust him to fight his former commander. The Bible states this negative response in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 28 verses 3 to 5 that reads,
The commanders of the Philistines asked, What about these Hebrews here? Achish replied to the question, Is this not David, who was an officer of Saul, king of Israel? Saying, He has already been with me for over a year, and from the day he left Saul until now, I have found no fault in him. But the Philistine commanders were angry with Achish and said, Send the man back, that he may return to the place you assigned him. He must not go with us into battle, or he will turn against us during the fighting. How better could he regain his master's favor than by taking the heads of our own men?
After the discussion, the Philistine forces advanced to the battlefield, where they finally confronted the Israelite army at Mount Gilboa. The outcome of the battle, led by the king of Gath on one side and the king of the Hebrews on the other, mirrors the account found in the Amarna archives. The biblical narrative in 1 Samuel chapter 29, verse 1, describes the defeat of Saul and his Hebrew forces.
The Philistines fought against Israel, the Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa.
The biblical account also describes the death of Saul a few verses later in this chapter, as it records,
The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically.
The same result for the confrontation of the king of Gath against the Habiru forces is recorded in the Amarna Letters. The report of the battle is authored by the king of Gath. He is quite clear about the death of the Habiru leader in the Amarna letter number 366, that attests,
May the king my lord be informed that the Habiru that rebelled against the lands of the God of the king my lord was captured by me, and I killed him.
The king of Gath then proceeds to name the kings who helped him against the Habiru forces. He names the governor of Jerusalem, the governor of Acre, and the governor of Ashaph.
Only Abdiheba of Jerusalem and I have been at war with the Habiru. Sarada, the ruler of Akka, and Endaruda, the ruler of Akshaph, these two also have come to my aid with 50 chariots, and now they are on my side in the war. So may it seem right in the sight of the king, my lord, and may he send Commissioner Yanhamu, so that we may all wage war, and you restore the land of the king.
Despite Tagi of Gintikirmo and Ilimelku being described as key allies of Suardata in other Amarna letters, these two leaders did not participate in the final battle against Labaya. This absence could be attributed either to their status as relatively minor leaders in the context of the battle, or to the possibility that their alliance with Suardata was cemented only after the confrontation. However, how this detail aligns with the third possibility, given by the biblical account of David being refused a place in the army, is particularly noteworthy. The depiction of Saul's death in the Amarna archive in letter 245 also aligns remarkably with the biblical narrative, creating a synchronism that it is just mesmerizing. It not only records the name of Labaya's military general, Balmer, whose phonetic resemblance to Saul's general, Abner, is compelling, but it also captures the final moments of this military leader in very specific detail. The next chapter delves into the fascinating parallels between the death of Labaya, as recorded in Amarna letter 245, and the biblical account of Saul's death. It will examine their dramatic escapes from the battlefield, the relentless pursuit by the king of Gath, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding the discovery of their lifeless bodies. This examination will also explore how these events set the stage for a divided rule, marked in the Amarna letters by references to the sons of Labaya, which may echo the division of Saul's kingdom in the biblical account. The battle at Mount Gilboa, where the Philistines defeated Saul and the Hebrew forces, parallels the account in the Amarna letters that describe the king of Gath's conflict with the Habiru. Both narratives detail the death of key leaders, Saul in the Bible and Labaya in the Amarna records, highlighting their final struggles and the alliances formed during these confrontations. The synchronism between these sources extends even to the similarities between their generals. The Bible provides two accounts of Saul's death, both describing the Philistines' relentless pursuit of him after his retreat from the battlefield. The first account, from 1 Samuel chapter 31, verse 2, states,
The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua.
The second account, from 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 6, elaborates,
There was Saul, leaning on his spear, with the chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit.
The Amarna Letters, particularly letter number 245, provide context for how Labaya, the Habiru leader, managed to escape the battlefield. According to the king of Gath, one of his allies was bribed by the Habiru leader to facilitate his escape. The letter reads,
"It had been Sarata who took Labaya from Megiddo and said to me, 'I will send him to the king by boat.' But Sarata took him, and he sent him from Hanathon to his home, for Sarata had accepted from him a ransom."
The same letter elaborates on this, revealing that the other kings were better rewarded for their victory than Suwardata. This disparity arose because the Egyptian pharaoh had been informed that Labaya was initially captured alive, but somehow escaped and was ultimately killed during the pursuit. The king of Gath describes,
"O Pharaoh, what have I done to the king, my lord, that he has treated me with contempt and honored my less important brothers? It was Sarata who let Labaya go, and it was Sarata who let Balmer go, both to their homes, and may the king, my lord, know."
The depiction of Saul's death in the Amarna archive, particularly in letter number 245, aligns with the biblical narrative. The letter records the name of Labaya's military general, Baal-Meher, whose phonetic resemblance to Saul's general, Abiner, is noteworthy, despite the limited etymological link. Additionally, it captures the final moments of Labaya in vivid detail, paralleling the biblical descriptions of Saul's demise. This hot pursuit, mentioned in the biblical accounts, is also echoed in letter 245, where the king of Gath details his own efforts to chase the fleeing leader. In a vivid description, the king narrates how he was forced to mount another Philistine king's chariot after his own horse was killed.
"As my mare was shot, I followed behind him and rode with Yashdada, but before my arrival, they had killed him."
Although the exact identity of whom the pronoun "they" refers to remains unclear, it is plausible to interpret it as denoting that Labaya's own men were likely responsible for delivering the fatal blow. This interpretation aligns with the biblical account, where Saul, critically wounded, pleaded with his subordinates to end his life to avoid falling into the hands of his enemies. According to two biblical accounts, Saul either died at the hands of his own men, as he requested, or took his own life. In 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 9 to 10, the narrative provides the account of a man who claimed to have carried out Saul's request and delivered the final blow.
"King Saul said to me, 'Stand here by me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive.' So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive."
His death fractured the unity of the tribes. It marked the tragic end of Israel's first monarchy, shattering hopes for stability and casting the tribes into a period of uncertainty. This uncertainty created the perfect scenario for David to rise as the new king of the Hebrews. The book of 2 Samuel chapter 2 verse 10 records how the tribe of Judah remained loyal to David, while the son of Saul named Ishbaal rose as the king over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all other tribes of Israel. This division of the Hebrew forces would lead to a war between the two factions. The assembly of both groups is documented in Amarna Letter 250, authored by Balmeher, the same Habiru military leader captured alongside Labaya, and later released after paying the ransom to Sarata. Likely under direct Egyptian oversight, he reports to the king of Egypt, detailing how the factions of the sons of Labaya sought to recruit him against Egypt. He now warns Pharaoh, stating,
"The two sons of the king's traitor, my lord, the two sons of Labaya, set their faces to cause the loss of the king's territory, my lord, after their father caused its loss."
One of the sons of Labaya could be David, as previously discussed, since the biblical character was the son-in-law of King Saul, from his first marriage with Saul's daughter Michal. It can also be argued that the son of Labaya mentioned in the Amarna letter could be Mephibosheth, who, despite being crippled from a childhood wound, he politically supported David's military faction, as described in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 6, which reads,
When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth, and he replied, At your service.
This connection is supported by Amarna letter number 289 from the king of Jerusalem, who connects Tagi of Gintikirmil directly to the sons of Labaya. The letter also opens a plurality of interpretations due to the unusual use of the word both in the text, which could be interpreted to refer either to Tagi or Mephibosheth as one of the sons of Labaya. The letter reads,
Elimelchu has written to Tagi and the sons of Labaya, Both of you be a protection. Grant all their demands to the men of Keilah, and let us cut off Jerusalem.
The other son of Labaya does have a direct parallel to the biblical character of Ish-Baal, who entered a 2-year conflict with King David and is first introduced in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 2, verse 8, which reads,
Abner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ish-Baal, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, and Jezreel, and also over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel. Ish-Baal, son of Saul, was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he reigned 2 years.
The next chapter will examine how Abner's decision to install Ish-Baal as leader of the Hebrews parallels Baal-Meher and Mut-Baal's alignment with Pharaoh's authority, aimed at uniting the Habiru under a leadership loyal to Egypt. It will also explore David's emergence as a central figure in the conflict with Ish-Baal, mirroring the conflict between Tagi and Mut-Baal recorded in the Amarna Letters, and highlighting David's strategic ability to manage tensions involving the kings of Gath and Jerusalem. The biblical account describes that the death of Saul marked the collapse of Israel's first monarchy. This event fractured the unity of the tribes, leaving Israel vulnerable to internal divisions and external threats. In a direct correlation, the Amarna Letters offer intriguing parallels, referencing the figures of Mut-Baal and Tagi. These ancient correspondences highlight the power struggles and alliances following Labaya's death, mirroring the biblical account of the rise of David and the division of Israelites into 2 factions. The premise of this study has the central focus of identifying the figure of King David to the Amarna vassal named Tagi of Gintikirmil, and to affirm that the 2 Hebrew factions that emerged from the death of Saul directly parallel the 2 sons of Labaya who carried on their father's rebellious legacy. It is the ruler of Gath-Padala, Baal-Meher, former commander of Labaya's force, in Amarna letter number 250, who writes,
The 2 sons of Labaya keep talking to me like this, saying, Wage war against the people of Gath for having killed our father, and if you do not wage war, then we will be your enemies.
One of these sons of Labaya has been identified in the Amarna letter as the ruler known as Mut-Baal. The name Mut-Baal in the Hurrian language is translated as man of the Lord, creating a compelling connection to the biblical name Ish-Baal, from Ish meaning man and Baal meaning Lord. However, throughout much of the Bible, this name appears as Ishbosheth, a deliberate play on words that transforms the meaning to man of shame. This substitution reflects the Judaic tradition's penchant for wordplay, often employed to convey theological or moral commentary. Amarna letter 255, authored by Mut-Baal, reveals his willingness to restore relations with the Pharaoh, mending what his father had broken, and pledging loyalty as an Egyptian vassal. In his offer of service, he commits to safeguarding the caravans of the king of Egypt by declaring,
Labaya, my father, used to serve the king, his lord. He himself used to send on all the caravans that the king would send to Hanagalbat. Let the king my lord send a caravan even to Caradunias, and I will personally conduct it under very heavy guard.
Although the identity of one of Labaya's sons is known, the identity of the second son remains a mystery. However, it is evident that he shares a deep connection with the ruler Tagi, as recorded in Amarna letter number 289, that reads,
Elimelchu has written to Tagi and the sons of Labaya, both of you be a protection. Grant all their demands to the men of Keilah, and let us cut off Jerusalem.
The two sons of Labaya, who rose to prominence after his death, mirror the two factions of Hebrews that emerged following the death of Saul. In the biblical account, one faction was led by Saul's son, Ishbaal, while the other rallied behind David, who enjoyed the political backing of Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul. The biblical account describes in details the conflict between the factions as a major event in the rise of David as the king of the Hebrews. The book of 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1 is the passage that better represents this war.
The war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker.
This war reveals another point of synchronicity in the figure of Abner, the military leader who commanded the forces of Ishbaal. Abner was the same man who fought alongside King Saul in the Battle of Mount Gilboa, serving as his trusted right hand. According to the biblical account in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 8 to 9, Abner was instrumental in establishing Ishbaal as a legitimate claimant to the Hebrew throne. The text records,
Abner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbaal, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, and Jezreel, and also over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel.
This study previously identified the biblical Abner as the Amarna vassal, Baal-Mer, the commander of Labaya mentioned in letter 245. He later reports a conflict with Tagi, identified here as King David, and his ally Elimelchu, identified as the biblical Ahimelech. This conflict, that mirrors closely the conflict between the Hebrew factions in the Bible, is detailed in Amarna letter 249, as Baal-Mer writes,
O Pharaoh, what have I done to Elimelchu, that he should treat my men more unjustly than his own servants? To Tagi, his father-in-law, he has handed over his own servants. And what can I myself do? They have been struck down because I am a loyal servant of the king.
Naturally, the previous connection of military leader Baal-Mer to Labaya suggests he would align himself with his direct successor, Mut-Baal. This is further supported by Amarna letter number 255, in which Mut-Baal offers to safeguard Egyptian caravans, and Amarna letter number 249, in which Baal-Mer reports criminal activities against Egypt carried out by the sons of Labaya. Both letters illustrate their willingness to take the same side, namely, the side of the Pharaoh. These parallels to the biblical narrative become even more compelling when considering Baal-Mer's conflict with Tagi of Gintikirmil, closely reflecting accounts found in the biblical text. Additionally, another fascinating connection arises in Amarna letter 256 by introducing yet a fourth figure named Ayub, whose name and actions bear a remarkable resemblance to Joab, the trusted commander of David's army, against Mut-Baal. Authored by Mut-Baal, the letter states,
How can it have been said in your presence, Mut-Baal has fled, he has hidden from Ayub? How can the king of Pella flee from the commissioner of the king, his lord?
The mere interaction between attested historical figures named Mut-Baal, Baal-Mer, Tagi, and Ayub, either related phonetically or etymologically to the characters of Ishbaal, Abner, David, and Joab, should inspire awe in anyone listening. This Amarna letter 256 seems to indicate the Pharaoh did not take Mut-Baal too seriously. The Amarna military leader, identified with the Ephraimite faction of the Hebrews, seems to be responding to a rumor that he had cowardly fled the city of Pella from the commissioner called Ayub. He seems to lack so much of the trust of the Pharaoh that he has to name other Levantine figures to have his word accepted. And the names of these are just as remarkable as the ones I just cited.
I swear Ayab is not in Pella. In fact, he has been in the field for 2 months. Just ask Ben-Elima. Just ask Tadua. Just ask Yisuya.
From the list, Ben-Elima could be related to David's future father-in-law, Eliam, father of Bathsheba. The name Yisuya has the exact name of David's biological father, Yesa. And Tadua is just an alternative spelling for the Hurrian word beloved, thus translating the same as David and Tagi. After all, it would make sense for Pharaoh to trust the word of Tagi and his relatives, since he has been a vassal of Egypt for years by now. Therefore, given the characters and alliances, all these Amarna letters strongly support the biblical account of the 2-year war between the houses of David and Saul after the Battle of Mount Gilboa. In the aftermath of this war, the next chapter will explore Tagi's rise as a central figure in the quarrel against Mut-Baal, and will highlight his ability to navigate the tensions between the kings of Gath and Jerusalem, which were intensified by the disparity of rewards following Labaya's death. When using the Amarna letters and the biblical account as complementary sources, in the end, this will lay the foundation for his rise as the king of the Habiru. This study explores parallels between the Amarna letters and the biblical narrative, particularly in the events surrounding the deaths of Saul and the Amarna ruler Labaya. The interactions of figures like Mut-Baal, Balmer, Tagi, Ayab Yisua, Ben-Elima, and Ili-Melku in Egyptian sources strikingly aligns with the respective biblical characters of Ishbaal, Abner, David, Joab, Yesa, Eliam, and Ahimelech. The Amarna letters recount conflicts involving these figures in a political landscape that closely mirrors David's rise to power following the fall of the House of Saul, revealing a fascinating overlap between the two accounts. Intriguingly, identifying Mut-Baal of the Amarna letters as the biblical Ishbaal provides a compelling explanation for his pejorative renaming as Ishbosheth, meaning man of shame. This derogatory title may not solely reflect his conflict with David, but could signify a deeper betrayal of his father's legacy, as suggested by his attempts to reconcile with Egypt and detailed in Amarna Letter 255. By pledging loyalty to Pharaoh and offering to safeguard Egyptian caravans, Mut-Baal appears to have abandoned the independent, rebellious ideals championed by his father, Labaya, aligning himself with the very empire that resisted and ultimately caused his father's demise. This act would have been perceived as shameful and dishonorable by those loyal to his father's vision. This aligns with the biblical description of Ishbaal's fall through betrayal, as described in 2 Samuel chapter 4, verses 5-7, that reads,
The sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, Rechab, and Baanah, set out, and about the heat of the day, they came to the house of Ishbosheth as he was taking his noonday rest. They came into the midst of the house as if to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach.
Despite the possible conflation of the event in Amarna letters and the biblical account, notably, Mut-Baal's ultimate fate remains unclear, but his disappearance from the archives suggests his decline. In contrast, the character of Tagi continues to gain prominence. The decline of the ruler Mut-Baal after reporting a conflict with the commissioner named Ayab marks a crucial shift in the diplomacy between Egypt and Canaan. Since this study will argue that the commissioner Ayab is the same as the commissioner Adaiah, who received Labaya's son earlier in this study, given that both names mean "my father is Yahweh," this shift may signify a growing Habiru identity and a rupture with Egyptian ties. After all, Amarna figures such as Adaiah, Adadanu, Suardada, Mut-Baal, and Tagi bear Hurrian names rather than Canaanite, reflecting their administrative ties rather than common spoken forms. This aligns with the practice in the Amarna letters, written in Akkadian, of translating names instead of preserving their native pronunciation. Translating proper names across languages remains standard today. Pope Francis appears in English documents instead of the Vatican's. Papa Francesco, James replaces Yaakov in English Bibles. Germany is used for Deutschland in political maps, and Christ is the standard for Hamashiach in most languages. In the Amarna Letters, the closer a figure was to Egyptian administration, the more precisely his name's meaning was rendered. This study restores their Canaanite forms, demonstrating that David was recorded as Tagi in official documents, not as a common usage, but as a diplomatic translation during his vassalage. Adaiah, whose name means "my father is Yahweh," would later be identified as Ayab in the correspondence, reflecting a deliberate rejection of Egyptian diplomatic conventions. Conversely, Suardata and Mut-Baal, who adhered to these conventions, were likely known personally as Akishamash and Ishbaal, respectively. Consequently, the biblical narrative may offer a more authentic record of their everyday names than the Amarna correspondence. The rising prominence of ruler Tagi reaches a pivotal moment of synchronization in this study. His latest actions not only parallel another key event in King David's biblical narrative, but also align with what is arguably the most defining decision of David's life, the one that established the foundation of the Kingdom of Israel. Remarkably, Tagi of Gintikirmil makes the decisive move to seize Jerusalem, mirroring this transformative turning point in David's ascent to power. It all begins with an unexpected shift in vassal relations revealed in Amarna Letter 280. In this letter, the king of Gath accuses his former ally, Abdi-Heba, the king of Jerusalem, of attempting to bribe the men of Keilah into submission, an act that, according to him, could ignite yet another rebellion. He writes,
O Pharaoh, why did Abdi-Heba write to the men of Keilah, saying, "Accept silver and follow me"? May the king, my lord, conduct an inquiry. If I took a man or a single ox or an ass from him, then he would be in the right. Labaya, who used to take our towns, is dead, but now Abdi-Heba has become another Labaya and seized our town.
This tension hints at fractured alliances among Egyptian vassals after they had worked together to defeat Labaya's rebellion. This letter also aligns with the biblical account of David's actions, as 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 6 recounts David's sudden desire to conquer Jerusalem.
King David and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there.
Furthermore, Amarna Letter 287 mentions Tagi's connection to Keilah, a city that David rescued in the biblical account. This makes it plausible that Keilah's central role in the dispute between Gath and Jerusalem reflects David's growing influence. Even more remarkably, subsequent letters affirm David's involvement, aligning seamlessly with the biblical narrative of his ascent to power and the geopolitical shifts of the period. In the biblical account, the first move of David before his attack against Jerusalem was to conquer all regions around it that were under Philistine control. This action is recorded in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 17 to 21, that reads,
The Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands?" The Lord answered him, "Go, for I will surely deliver the Philistines into your hands." So David went to Baal-perazim, and there he defeated them. He said, "As waters break out, the Lord has broken out against my enemies before me."
The conquest of this region has a perfect synchronism with the Amarna archive. The Amarna letter number 289 has the king Abdi-Heba naming cities from Gath all the way through the valley of Rephaim to Jerusalem and beyond, as far as Keilah to the south and Beit Shean to the north, that were under his control, but were eventually lost by the conquests of Tagi and Elimelech. No doubt the synchronisms with Kings David and Ahimelech only grew stronger since the letter writes,
This was what Elimelech and Tagi did. They captured Arabah. Now as for Jerusalem, if this land belongs to the king, why isn't it of concern to the king like Hazatu? Gintikirmo belongs to Tagi, and men of Gath are the garrison in Beit Shean.
Once you go to the map, it is an amazing synchronism. In summary, the Amarna Letters describe that this Tagi of Gintikirmo emerges as one of the key leaders of a coalition. He was not acting alone, but forged an alliance with Elimelchu of Gezer and Suardata of Gath. Together, they conquered cities and territories in a way that mirrored the conquests described in the Bible by King David. Just as David's campaigns unified and expanded Israel, this coalition sought to reshape the political landscape of Canaan, challenging established rulers and exerting control over key regions in a similar manner. The next chapter will delve into Tagi's strategic military and political maneuvers to unite the Philistines of Gath, the zealots of Elimelchu, and the Habiru rebellion under his command around a common enemy, Jerusalem, culminating in its eventual conquest. By analyzing the synchronisms between biblical accounts and all these Amarna letters, it becomes evident that David's rise was not merely a tale of military victories, but also of calculated alliances and shifting loyalties. The letters reveal the desperation of the king of Jerusalem as he laments the loss of key cities to Tagi and Elimelchu, underscoring the growing influence of David and Ahimelech over regions once held by the Philistines and other Egyptian vassals. This study highlights remarkable parallels between the Amarna letters and the biblical narrative, particularly in the accounts of key figures and events such as the deaths of Saul and Labaya, the rise of David, and the political struggles surrounding Jerusalem. Through these letters, figures like Tagi, Elimelchu, and Suardata emerge as pivotal players in conflicts that mirror David's alliances, military campaigns, and eventual conquest of Jerusalem, offering compelling synchronism between the historical and biblical records. The entire situation is vividly detailed by the king of Jerusalem, Abdi-Heba, offering a remarkable perspective from the viewpoint of the adversaries of King David. The Amarna letter number 289, authored by this king of Jerusalem, reads,
Now as for Jerusalem, if this land belongs to the king, why isn't it of concern to the king, like Hazatu? Gintikirmo belongs to Tagi, and men of Gath are the garrison in Beit Shean. Are we to act like Labaya when he was giving the land of Shechem to the Habiru?
In Amarna letter 290, Abdi-Heba's despair becomes evident as he writes to the king of Egypt, describing the advance his allies Elimelchu. This study identifies to biblical Ahimelech and the king of Gath, along with their alliance with the Habiru under Tagi of Gintikirmo. The text reads,
A town belonging to Jerusalem, named Beth Dagon by name, a city of the king, has gone over to the side of the men of Keilah. May the king pay attention to Abdi-Heba, your servant, and send archers to restore the land of the king to the king. If there are no archers, the land of the king will desert to the Habiru. This action against the land was at the order of Elimelchu and at the order of Suardata, along with Gath. May the king provide for his land.
These Amarna letters reveal Tagi of Gintikirmo as a pivotal leader in a powerful coalition. Far from acting alone, he skillfully forged alliances with Elimelchu of Gezer and Suardata of Gath, creating a united front that conquered cities and territories with striking parallels to the biblical conquests of King David. Just as David's campaigns unified and strengthened Israel, this coalition, led by Tagi, sought to transform the political landscape of Canaan, challenging established powers and reshaping the region with bold, decisive actions. The list of Tagi's allies expands in Amarna letter 289, which describes Ahimelech not only siding with the sons of Labaya, identified in this study as Tagi himself, and a hypothetical Mephibosheth, but also aligning with the sons of the ruler of Ruhizi, named Zeruiah. This figure authored the Amarna letters number 191 and 192, and has also been linked to the Habiru in Amarna letter number 197. In Amarna letter number 289, Abdi-Heba details the role of Zeruiah's sons in the attack against him. shedding further light on the alliances shaping the conflict.
Elimelech does not break away from the sons of Labaya and from the sons of Zeruiah, as they desire the land of the king for themselves. As for a mayor who does such a deed, why does the king not call him to account?
The name Zeruiah closely aligns phonetically with the female biblical character of Zeruiah, described in the biblical narrative as David's sister. However, within the context of the Amarna Letters, this reference likely signifies a political alliance rather than a familial tie. Even more significant are Zeruiah's sons in the biblical account, named Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. This study has already established Joab's identification with the Amarna commissioner Ayub. Over the next 12 chapters, Abishai will be analyzed as Abdi Ashirta, a pivotal figure in this investigation. The third son, Asahel, may correspond to Amarna vassal Arasa Eli, though unlike the previous two, this identification rests solely on phonetic resemblance. Additionally, in Amarna Letter 287, the king of Jerusalem reports that the commissioner named Adiah, whom this study conflates with this other commissioner named Ayub, and the son of Zeruiah, as well as with the biblical Joab, had abandoned his posts and was subsequently dismissed by the Pharaoh, likely due to his rebellious activities. As the letter states,
"Gone is Adiah together with the garrison of soldiers that the king provided. May the king know that Adiah said to me, Behold, he the Pharaoh has dismissed me. O Pharaoh, do not abandon it, and send this year a garrison, and send right here."
In this same Amarna letter number 287, the king of Jerusalem lists more cities that joined the coalition under Tagi, which includes Gezer, Ashkelon, and Lachish, as it states,
May the king know that all the lands are at peace with one another, but I am at war. May the king provide for his land. Consider the lands of Gezer, Ashkelon, and Lachish. They have given food, oil, and any other requirement to the Habiru. So may the king provide for archers, and send the archers against the men that commit crimes against the king, my lord.
The despair of the king of Jerusalem becomes more evident in Amarna letter 288, as he writes to the king of Egypt about military losses around the region of Shiloh.
Behold, Tirbazu was slain in the city gate of Shiloh, and the king did nothing. Behold, servants who were joined to the Habiru, Zimreda of Lachish, and Yaptihata was also slain in the city gate of Shiloh. The king did nothing. Why has he not called them to account?
The king of Jerusalem laments the situation in Amarna letter number 288, stating that too few cities remain loyal to Egypt. He paints a vivid picture of David's ability to gather support from both sides, Hebrews and Philistines, and finally declares that he is on the brink of losing the war.
I am at war as far as the land of Seru, and as far as Ginti Kirmil. All the mayors are at peace, but I am at war. I am treated like an Habiru, and I do not visit the king, my lord, since I am at war. I am situated like a ship in the midst of the sea. The strong hand of the king took the land of Narima and the land of Cush, but now the Habiru have taken the very cities of the king. Not a single mayor remains loyal to the king, my lord. All are lost.
Remarkably, David's kingdom was built not only through military conquests, but also through friendships and alliances carefully maintained between the Hebrews and Philistines. This characterization is consistent with biblical accounts of David's life and leadership. The imminent attack on Jerusalem is confirmed in Amarna letter 290, where its king lists the cities of the coalition marching against him.
They commanded troops from Gezer, troops from Gath, and troops from Keilah. They seized Arabah. The lands of the king have been abandoned to the Habiru.
It is fascinating to see the cities associated with Elimelech, Suardata, and Tagi, or as their biblical counterparts may be identified, Ahimelech, Achish, and David, mentioned together. As we read these texts, their synchronicity with the Bible brings a smile to our faces. Unfortunately, we do not have an Amarna letter detailing the results of the attack on Jerusalem. By this time, Egypt had entered the reign of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, who abandoned Amarna and moved the administration to Thebes. However, the biblical account in 2 Samuel 5, verse 7-10 provides the conclusion.
David captured the fortress of Zion. He then took up residence in the fortress and called it the City of David. He built up the area around it, from the terraces inward, and he became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him.
This remarkable synchronization between the Amarna letters and the biblical narrative continues to provide compelling evidence for the historicity of these events. The next chapter of this study will delve into the final conquest of Jerusalem as described in Amarna Letter 290, shedding light on the geopolitical and historical implications of this event. It will also explore archaeological evidence from the Late Bronze Age that aligns with the Jerusalem of David's time, providing a bridge between biblical narratives and material culture. Finally, and most importantly, the chapter will address the challenge of reconciling the biblical timeline with historical chronology, employing radiocarbon calibration curves as the best argument to defend a new chronological framework through the correction of a known anomaly called the Hallstatt Plateau. This study aims to establish correlations between the Amarna letters and biblical events, emphasizing the parallels between ancient texts and biblical narratives. By examining the synchronicity between archaeological evidence of Tagi of Gintikirmil's attack on Jerusalem and the biblical account of King David's conquest of the same city, this research provides deeper insights into the historical context of the period. The imminence of the attack on Jerusalem is vividly recorded by its own king, named Abdi-Heba, who authored the Amarna Letter 289, where he declares that he is on the brink of losing the war.
I am situated like a ship in the midst of the sea. The strong hand of the king took the land of Nahrima and the land of Cush, but now the Habiru have taken the very cities of the king. Not a single mayor remains loyal to the king, my lord. All are lost.
The conquest of Jerusalem is powerfully captured in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 7-10 that reads,
David captured the fortress of Zion. He then took up residence in the fortress and called it the City of David. He built up the area around it from the terraces inward, and he became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him.
The archaeological evidence from the City of David remains one of the most compelling arguments for the synchronism between Tagi and David. This evidence ties together history, scripture, and archaeology in a way that resonates deeply. The City of David, located on the southeast hill of East Jerusalem, is widely accepted as the former royal city of King David. This has prompted significant archaeological excavations that have uncovered much of the ancient city. The site was first occupied during the Copper Age, with a modest urban center emerging in the Late Bronze Age and continuing into the Iron Age. Historians and archaeologists generally associate King David's reign with the early Iron Age period, starting during 1100s BC and finishing by year 700 BC, based on the biblical timeline. However, archaeological findings suggest that the city uncovered from this early Iron Age period could not have been the same city conquered by David. There are key inconsistencies in placing King David within this period, which warrant further exploration.
The Bible describes Jerusalem as a fortress conquered by David, as stated in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 7, that reads, David captured the fortress of Zion. Yet, the early Iron Age city lacks fortifications entirely, which is an unexpected finding for what was supposed to be an important stronghold. According to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 8, David's men used an underground water system to capture the city. The Bible reads, anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft. However, The water system in the early Iron Age city was deactivated until the end of this period, making it an unlikely match for David's conquest. Besides, military sieges, such as David's conquest, usually leave evidence of battle, destruction layers, arrowheads, or scorch marks. However, no such evidence exists in the early Iron Age until the late kingdoms of Jerusalem. This absence extends to other events, such as the Absalom revolt, and more importantly, Pharaoh Shishak's campaign, which also left no trace of destruction. In contrast, the Bronze Age layer of the city, located beneath the early Iron Age strata, presents several archaeological findings that align more closely with the biblical narrative.
The Bronze Age city was surrounded by substantial walls, consistent with its identification as a strong Jebusite fortress. These walls are called today the Canaanite walls for its earlier origins. Also, a water canal designated Canal No. 2 of the Warren's Shaft Complex by archaeologists was functional during the Bronze Age, providing a plausible route for David's forces to infiltrate the city. Additionally, evidence of battle, including arrowheads, scorch marks, and other signs of conflict, have been discovered in the Bronze Age layer, supporting the idea of several sieges. More importantly, residence construction and civilian migration from the Bronze Age city of David suggest this aligns with the time David transformed the site from a military stronghold into a royal and administrative center. This evidence indicates the Bronze Age city, not the Iron Age settlement, was the city David captured and made his capital. Still, this poses a significant chronological challenge. The Bronze Age city of David and the Amarna Letters have been dated to around 1300 BC, based on current scholarship, while the biblical timeline places David at 1000 BC. This creates a 300-year discrepancy. Adding to this issue, the early Iron Age is marked by a significant lack of historical evidence, often called an ancient dark age. Over 450 years, it has produced sparse archaeological records, including limited tree rings for dendrochronological reference. Apart from scarce Assyrian and Egyptian sources, monuments, inscriptions, seals, and letters from other civilizations are unusually absent. Moreover, a radiocarbon anomaly known as the Hallstatt Plateau compounds this problem. The Hallstatt Plateau refers to a period when atmospheric radiocarbon concentrations inexplicably fluctuated minimally, making the precise calibration of dates difficult. Ironically, the fragmentary records of this time are often invoked to defend the plateau's existence, while the fragmentary records of archaeology found in the field are always interpreted back into the broader time span of the plateau, thus creating a circular reasoning. Therefore, this study argues that none of these anomalies, neither the 300-year discrepancy nor the so-called ancient dark age, much less the Hallstatt Plateau, are genuine. Instead, it contends that these anomalies were fabricated to uphold a flawed chronological framework stemming from a misinterpretation of Egyptian and Assyrian king lists. David Rohl and Peter James, prominent proponents of revised chronologies, have argued that the early Iron Age timeline, traditionally spanning 450 years, could be condensed to 150 years, a third of its length. The timeline was overextended by treating Assyria's kings in the cities of Ashur and Nimrud to be sequential rather than concurrent. Considering them parallel kingdoms reduces the early Iron Age period to the proposed time length by avoiding the mistake of stacking overlapping rule. There was also failed to recognize that, for a time, Egypt was as fragmented as Canaan in David's era, with multiple pharaohs ruling major cities simultaneously rather than in a single line of succession. This theory resolves the 300-year discrepancy. Additionally, the concentration of documents from 450 years into a more condensed 150-year period helps fill gaps and provides a more expected volume of records, challenging the notion of an ancient dark age. And, more importantly, it eliminates much of the Hallstatt Plateau, mostly in the more specific Iron Age 2B period. By reinterpreting sparse records and archaeological gaps as artifacts of an artificially stretched timeline, this approach provides a more focused, evidence-based framework for history. In other words, assigning a specific date within a flawed chronological framework is akin to concluding that World War II never happened because no nuclear bomb is found in the year 1700 AD. This is the folly of misdating history.
Scholars today date the evidence for David's time to 1300 BC, but this study concludes that the modern historical consensus is wrong, and the Bible has been correct all along. From this correct timeline, the rise of Pharaoh Akhenaton could be dated to the period of 1050s BC, demonstrating that modern scholarship has been using flawed dates for centuries when dating any period before the early Iron Age. These errors stem from one root cause: trying to insert events in a predetermined chronology instead of looking the evidence for itself. The context is more important than the fact because of the preconception that ancient civilizations were not trustful enough to record their own history. And when some recorded events do not match the current date, those are scorned as myths and legends.
The truth is that ancient civilizations were more careful about recording history than our biased scholarship. The truth is that, despite the advancements of natural sciences, which gave us computers and rockets, secular ideologies caused a setback in human sciences and brought us a century of faltering economies, multiplied genocides, rising mental illness, and errors in chronology, from the emergence of many poisonous doctrines, like communism, relativism, psychoanalysis, and gender studies.
To grow as a society, we must return to our roots. Christianity must reclaim the universities they founded. History needs meaning, psychology needs cautionary tales, and economics must be interpreted not by the spirit of the times, but by the individuals who champion them. Only by reuniting faith and reason, men and purpose, can we hope to overcome the failures of the modern age.
I hope you will join me in the next 12-chapter series, where I will explore King David's war against the Arameans, the attestation of the three mighty warriors, and the formation of the Kingdom of Israel, as described in the Amarna Letters, culminating in the recognition of the Habiru as a nation to pacify the chaotic Levant through the marriage of the son of Tagi of Jerusalem with the princess of an emerging, lineage-unbound Egyptian dynasty. Until then, may God not withhold his mercy from you, and may divine love and truth always protect you.